This is Booking It to Financial Freedom, show number 2.
There's a difference between your profession and your business. So your W-2 job is your profession, it's not your business. Your business is really focusing on your asset column, not your income column.
The average American works 4 or 5 months. Like all of the wages that you make for 4 or 5 months of the entire year is just to pay taxes.
To pay the taxes.
Pay taxes, Social Security, all that stuff. I don't think there's a person on earth who wouldn't say, man, I wish I could keep more of that, right? Utilize it the way that it's meant to be utilized.
Welcome to Booking It to Financial Freedom, where we explore literature from some of the most successful experts in their field to help you build a blueprint for personal growth and financial freedom. Join us as we examine a new book every month and break down key concepts to help you get out of the rat race and on track to start building a life better than you ever imagined.
Hey everyone, I'm your host, Amanda Schneider, realtor and investor, and I'm here with my co-host, Jamie Booth. Hey, Jamie.
Hey, Amanda. Great to be back here for episode number 2. Exciting stuff.
I know, it's so exciting. So, Jamie, you and I were kind of chatting before we started recording this about goals for 2023. I think you and I are both big proponents of setting goals for the year. It just kind of helps keep us on track, know what it is we're trying to achieve for the year. Do you want to share maybe some of the goals that you set for 2023?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, goals are extremely important. I'm not a big believer, this is the new year. I'm not a big believer in resolutions at all. I don't think I've ever set a resolution in my life.
Agreed.
But absolutely, goals are a 1,000% must for anybody. The way I look at it is if you don't have a goal, it's kind of like the old saying, if you're not growing, you're dying kind of thing. So if you don't have a goal, basically you're just floundering around in life for the most part, especially if you have, more professional or financial goals, you're never going to reach them. Or if you don't have goals, you're never going to reach them, right?
Absolutely. You don't know what you're aiming for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you and I both have the same routine. We set down at the beginning of the year, kind of schedule out our goals for the year. One of my goals is, my personal goals is to walk 1,500 miles this year. I got close to 2,000 last year.
Right.
But 100 miles of that was on the Colorado Trail. So
it's amazing.
I'm setting it, that was quite a lot to bite last year. So I toned it down to 1,500. I still think that's a pretty
it's a lofty goal. Yeah. And
yeah.
Just so our listeners know, when Jamie says walking, he's not talking about just like a leisurely walk. He's usually got a very heavy pack, usually in some terrain rather than just something flat. So it's quite the achievement.
Right. Yeah. And 200 of those miles I plan to do on the Colorado Trail. So it's going to be good.
Awesome.
And then I guess for my business side of it, one of the goals I have set for myself this year is to acquire at least one rental property, hopefully more if things go well. But what about you? What's some of your goals?
Yeah. Well, first, I just wanted to say that it will be really fun to track kind of your progress in that goal because now you've given it out to the whole podcast world. So we'll keep you accountable.
That's one of the things you got to do with goals is to have accountability.
Yeah.
So when you throw it out there, I guess you're out there.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, we're both real estate agents and on the same team. So we've obviously set some goals for our team, a lot loftier than last year. So really looking forward to kind of see how that pans out. But as far as personal goals, my husband, Lindsay, and I just started playing tennis last year, and we fell in love with it. So one of our goals is to enter and win a doubles tournament. So we'll see how that goes.
I respect that.
Yeah.
I'm horrible at tennis.
Yeah. It's been something really fun. We're both really competitive, and he's annoyingly good at everything he does. And so he's quickly surpassed me. But I think we are a good team together. But as far as business goals, Lindsay and I want to probably 1031 a couple of our single families into a multifamily or possibly a syndication. And for those of you that don't know what those terms mean, we'll talk about 1031 a little bit later in the show. And as this podcast goes on, we'll kind of explain some of those strategies. But that's our major business goal. So, yeah.
Cool stuff.
Yeah. So before we kind of get in the meat of today's show, do you want to kind of recap a little bit about what we talked about on our first episode?
Sure. Right. So, because of the way we've kind of structured the podcast, it kind of makes sense to, especially for new viewers, like if they just jump in, to kind of recap what we have been doing. So for those of you who don't know or are just tuning in possibly, we are reviewing Rich Dad Poor Dad, and last week we covered chapters 1 and 2.
Right.
Today we're going to do 3 and 4. But yeah, if you want to jump in and you're just finding us now, by all means, but go buy a copy of the book and then kind of start at episode 1.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So let's go ahead and jump into today's discussion. So we are covering chapters 3 and 4, like you talked about. And so the first chapter is actually called Mind Your Business, Mind Your Own Business. So this is actually what Robert Kiyosaki calls the secret number 3 of the rich. And he says, you want to make sure you mind your business. Don't spend your whole life working for someone else.
Right.
So one of the key concepts he's really trying to help us understand here is that there's a difference between your profession and your business. So he said he'll often ask people, what is your business? And they'll say, oh, I'm a banker. And he'll say, well, what bank do you own? And they're like, oh, no, I'm a banker for, Wells Fargo or whatever it is. And he makes the point of distinguishing that's not your business. You are working for somebody else. You're their W-2. Your business is actually, it doesn't mean you have to own a business, but it's how you are managing your assets and your wealth. So he really wants us to understand that. So your W-2 job is your profession. It's not your business. And so your business is really focusing on your asset column, not your income column, because, getting promotions and things like that are great, but only if you're taking that extra money and buying those assets with it, like we talked about last week of, helping your money work for you and continuing to grow. So I thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit that he helps us to distinguish.
Yeah.
So
it was kind of neat because obviously I'm always watching, self-improvement videos, all that stuff. And one of the points he makes is that through the education system, the way it's designed is designed to get you prepared to be a part of the workforce, right? And, obviously he states that, what you tend to study, you become, right? So it makes sense if you study culinary arts, you're going to become a chef, or if you're going to study mechanics, you're going to be a mechanic and all that stuff. And it kind of ties into one of the things that I'm aware of and that I point out is like you can also look at it as the things that you read, you become as well.
Absolutely.
But he says that by all means go get your job, your job, right? But you have to protect your money. So even though you have a job and you're working for, a wage, you're paying taxes, you're paying that employer. And then if you have a mortgage, you're paying it. So all of that money that you're working for is going to other people other than you.
Absolutely.
And but you have to run your life as though it were a business. So you have to protect the money that you actually get to keep at that point.
Absolutely.
And grow your asset column.
Yes.
So you have to concentrate on taking that W-2 job and turning it into assets.
Yeah, because as we chatted about last time is if you lose that W-2 job or you get hurt and you can't do that job anymore, what are you left with? Then, potentially unemployment from the government, but that's, that's hard to live off of that. So it's really important, like you said, you mind your life like you mind your business.
Yeah. He also talks about being trapped. He uses an example where young couples, and I'm just like everybody else, I'm guilty. I was in my early 20s. I was making a decent money in the military. And what do? You go out, you qualify for those credit cards, you rack all those credit card bills up, and then you become trapped. We talked last episode about people not understanding or not even realizing that they're trapped in the rat race. But, all too often, probably far too often, people get completely trapped financially because they stretch themselves so thin.
Yeah.
And then they feel like there's no way out. There's no, what do you do? Like you can barely afford to pay your bills. How in the world are you going to buy assets, right? So anybody that's listening to this, it's in their late teens, early 20s, you're just starting in the workforce, by all means, please don't buy a lot of debt or don't accumulate a lot of debt.
Yeah. Or if you're a parent, please pass along this financial literacy that we're trying to, educate people about through this podcast. Absolutely. So one thing that we really want to do with this podcast too is make sure that we give people just some actionable steps or things that they can start to do. A lot of this is maybe theory or mindset, but there are things you can start to do now before we really get into those books that have a lot of actionable items. So basically, something that Robert is saying in chapter 3 is by all means, keep your daytime job because obviously you still need to earn a living. But what you need to do is to start reducing your liabilities and start to buy those assets. So I think you and I were chatting the other day, you were saying, kind of the golden rule is saving at least 10% or setting aside 10% of your W-2 income. A quote that I really liked from the book is Robert says, once $1 goes into it, never let it come out. Think of it this way. Once a dollar goes into your asset column, it becomes your employee. The best thing about money is that it works 24 hours a day and can work for generations. So the number one thing that you guys can start doing now is, if you don't already, have a spreadsheet or kind of have a budget and understand what you're spending, is start to track your spending and then try to reduce that spending and try to take some of that money, save it, and start to buy some assets, which, if you continue to listen to us, will help to kind of educate you on that and guide you on assets that might interest you.
Yeah, so. And as you grow, one of the things he talks, I think it's in this chapter, he talks about how important the skill of accounting is.
Yes.
And as you start to grow your wealth, obviously that becomes more and more important. He says, the accuracy of your accounting as you grow, or if you want to grow, it has to be spot on. So, you have to look at things from that perspective. I know it sounds pretty boring, might be even off-putting to some people, like, oh, I got to run my life like a business and I have to, worry about accounting and all that stuff. But, at the end of the day, that is one of the core concepts to being able to grow yourself. So you can't ignore it, right?
Absolutely. And just like you were saying last week, most people don't know they're in the rat race. I'm sure a lot of people out there don't track their spending. So it's really going to be eye-opening for them when they do. And obviously, if you can afford it, there's people out there, bookkeepers that you can hire that can do that for you. But just a basic Excel spreadsheet, or even just reviewing your credit card every month to see where your money's going. Yeah,
I think he actually uses an example in there where I think it was his rich dad paid a decent amount of money for a good accountant. He said that, paying the money that he spent paying for the good accountant was less than he would have to pay the government, right?
So, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And so we keep talking about assets. So I just want to take a little bit of time to kind of define what some assets are that people may eventually become interested in investing. So one of them is obviously businesses. You can start your own business. But one thing that Robert really stresses in the book is that if you are working in your own business, it's not an asset, it's now a job. So what he typically does is he'll build a business. Maybe he works in it for a year, but by the end of that year, he's either selling it or it's managed or run by somebody else. My husband, Lindsay, actually just sold his portion of a short-term rental management company that he had started with a business partner 2 years ago. And it was for that exact same reason. They didn't have the ability to bring someone in to run it full time. And Lindsay was just constantly working in the job. And that's not our goal, is to be bogged down by something like that. So businesses that are run by other people, paper assets, which of course is, the stock market, stocks and bonds. And then real estate, which is obviously our favorite. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Income generating real estate.
Income generating, yes. Good distinction. And then you can also do notes, which is loaning people money and you earn interest on that money. So that's another kind of safer way and kind of a low cost way to get into it. And then commodities, which is investing in actual commodities like agriculture, oil, etc. So basically anything that has value, that produces income or appreciates and has a ready market and people that want to invest in it, is an asset. So
yeah, I think one of the biggest things I think people will, as they hear this, like, oh, I don't have the extra money to invest in or start a company or to buy a house, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be gigantic purses. You could also get into, a REIT or something like that, or just allocating as much money as you can to these income producing assets. It doesn't have to, you don't have to start with $1 million.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, why real estate is one of our favorite asset classes to invest in, is because you can really leverage with real estate. So for example, if I want to buy, say, a duplex for $400,000, maybe I need 20% down. So I need, $100,000. 25% down, I need $100,000, but I now own a $400,000 asset. Even though I have a mortgage on it, I am able to set rents based on an asset that's $400,000, and it's appreciating as a $400,000 piece of property, even though I only put in $100,000. So, that's. And
you might not even have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you fundraise, get other investors. You could use other, we always talk about OPM in the real estate world. It's other people's money, right?
Absolutely.
So you don't necessarily have to have that $100,000 sitting in your pocket. If you, go around and ask your family, friends, all that stuff, you might have a piece of that property, but you still can get into it without necessarily having to have a lot of money.
Absolutely. And I see in the future that maybe we'll do some podcasts that are a little bit more targeted on ideas like that, but we just kind of want to give people general knowledge of what's actually out there and what you can do. Even buying a primary residence and having a couple roommates, somebody that helps to reduce your expenses so you can then put some of that money away towards buying other assets, et cetera, is all great examples.
Yeah. And he goes on to say that, whatever you do, whatever asset class you start to invest in, make sure that you love it, right?
Absolutely.
It's kind of hard to love the stock market. I guess some people do, that their lives are evolved around it. But, he says, don't go out and buy real estate if you don't absolutely love real estate. He says he loves real estate. He loves shopping for houses. He loves looking at houses. He loves owning those, small, business buildings, all that stuff. So make sure whatever you do jump into, that you have your heart into it, and that you continue to basically massage and babysit and, nurture it to grow.
Yeah, because if you don't love it, you're not going to want to spend the time that it takes to find those properties and research. And that's, I think that's why you and I both got our real estate license, is because I know I found myself 5 years ago, all I was doing was thinking about real estate. I was listening to real estate podcasts. I was listening to books about it. And it just made sense that I'd at least get my license to help in our investments. And then I'm like, why would I continue to work an office job that I don't like when I love real estate? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's the reason why I got my license as well. It wasn't to be necessarily a realtor, but I love the idea of owning a large portfolio, and I thought that getting my license would be my foot in the door, and here I am. So I'm absolutely loving it.
Yes, for sure. Cool. Well, I think that's a good segue to kind of talk about chapter 4, which he talks about taxes.
Everyone loves this one.
So this one is why the rich pay lower taxes, or at least that's what we named it. So he does, if you're reading the book, he does give kind of a more comprehensive history of taxes, which we won't get into, but
yeah, I'll have to say that this chapter probably was my least favorite. It's kind of
it's a little boring.
Kind of hard to get into tax history, but
it is.
He does make a couple really interesting points. Like he points out the fact that Great Britain and America, when they started out, there was no tax levy on the people. Britain would only levy taxes when there was a war going on or campaign. I think he mentioned some stuff in the past, but they would be temporary.
Absolutely.
And then it wasn't until I think the 16th Amendment for us that created the tax as we know it today. And then same thing, Britain eventually become full-time tax, populace. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, taxes originally started, they were only taxing the rich. But as the government saw how much money they were making, their appetite for that money grew. And it eventually started to be passed down to the middle class and the lower class. And some tax laws started to be passed that the rich understood probably better than the middle and lower class. And that's how they were able to pay less taxes, basically, which we'll talk about a little bit here.
It basically paints the picture that the poor and middle class who voted for the taxes to be implemented on the rich, and he uses the Robin Hood story about stealing from the rich and all and giving to the poor, but
absolutely,
the rich and the middle class basically shot themselves in the foot by implementing the taxes, and then of course the rich or the rich people who have obviously they have a higher interest and more money and use their intelligence to divert a lot of that off themselves.
Absolutely, because as their income grows, their potential tax liability grows, and it can become absurd where you're paying 50% of your income to the government. And so they found these ways, and one of the best ways is what Robert calls the power of corporations. So this is like an LLC or an S Corp or a partnership. And basically, when you form these types of corporations, not only are they subject to lower tax rates, but it's the way that they pay their expenses that is truly the benefit. So for instance, we have LLCs for all of our properties. So that means that we can earn the money from our rentals. We then spend the money to improve the rentals. Maybe we use some of it for when we're meeting with clients or our tenants or whatever, we take them out to eat. We can expense all of that. And then we pay taxes. So we spend the money first, and it actually lowers our tax liability, where if you're a W-2 employee, the way it works is you earn the money, you pay your taxes, and then you spend the money, then you're having those expenses. So you're actually spending money after tax. And so as you were making the point when we were kind of getting ready for this, you're being taxed with your house, with your sales tax, with all the other taxes
tax, Social
after you've
Security,
paid your income tax. Yeah.
I think one of the mind-boggling things that he pointed out is, especially if you're in a higher tax bracket, the average American works 4 or 5 months, like all of the wages that you make for 4 or 5 months of the entire year is just to pay taxes.
To pay the taxes.
Pay taxes, Social Security, all that stuff. And then the rest of the year, you're working to keep the money that's left over.
Mm-hmm. And the highest group of individuals that are taxed is the middle to upper class, upper middle class is the ones that typically pay the highest taxes. We're probably talking about people that make $100,000 to $150,000 a year or so. And again, they're excited for those raises that they get, but their taxes increase, and there's no way to offset it when they're a W-2 employee.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe a little controversial to say, but I don't care who you are. Like, if you're making that kind of money and you see almost half of your income disappearing to taxes, I don't think there's a person on earth who wouldn't say, man, I wish I could keep more of that, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's, being able to not necessarily take advantage of the tax code, but to utilize it the way that it's meant to be utilized. So that's kind of the first part, the mind your business. So if you're running your life as though it's a business, you're keeping more of that money by hedging your hard-earned money against taxes.
It's all about what Robert was saying of you need to have the knowledge. So it's not that the rich or, the rich, it's not that they're greedy or they don't want to pay their share fair, that kind of thing. They're just more educated on how to legally use the tax system. So another thing I was talking about earlier in the intro was the power of the 1031. So basically what a 1031 allows you to do is that when you sell real estate, a piece of property, typically, if you haven't lived in it for 2 of the last 5 years, you have to pay what's called capital gains tax, which can be quite a bit, especially if the property has appreciated a lot. So instead of having to pay taxes, what you can do is sell that property and you have 45 days to identify another investment. As long as it's higher price than your previous one, you can actually roll all of those funds and all of that capital gains into another property, therefore deferring your taxes. And you can do that over and over until you die. And then once you pass it to your children, they actually don't have to pay those taxes anymore.
Yeah. In the real estate world, it's basically been referred to many times as playing Monopoly.
Absolutely.
So you turn your house into a hotel and in the hotel into a bigger one, and then you just keep deferring all those taxes.
Yep. And I just wanted to give a quick example too. When we were filing our CPA was doing our taxes last year, she gave us our tax bill and it was way higher than I had expected it. And I went back and she had missed a bunch of expenses from one of our rental properties. And so I was able to go back in and we were able to reduce our tax liability by $10,000 just because of all of those expenses that we could write off, which was amazing.
Yeah. So. And kind of the more you educate yourself on the American tax system, all that stuff, the more you realize that the tax code is written to promote small businesses and businesses.
Absolutely.
And that's for economic growth, for the overall health of the country. So these benefits are written in there specifically to help you grow your business and anyone else who wants to start one. So it's not necessarily, I think a lot of people look at it as like, oh, they're trying to find loopholes or they're taking advantage of tax code or whatever. No, a lot of this stuff is actually written to promote that.
To help our economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and as we were saying, knowledge is power. And Robert says, without knowledge, the world pushes you around. So you really need to understand the financial intelligence of it all. He said the 4 main principles that you need to understand is financial literacy, which we chatted about last week, understanding your assets and your liabilities, understanding how investing works, how the markets work, and then understanding the tax law, which we just talked about. If you can understand those 4 key principles, then you are way ahead of the game and you have that power.
Yeah. And I believe he says in the book as well, the people who don't understand this and who are trying to grow their wealth, it's the difference between someone walking and someone flying. So if you're not literate in all of these key categories, you're going to grow so much slower. But as you get more intelligent on all of these aspects, you will just take off.
Absolutely. Yep. I totally agree. Cool. Well, I think that kind of sums up the 2 chapters that we read for this week. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that we missed?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Like I said, I think that about wraps it up, but I did want to kind of address the last topic that we talked about with taxes because it is a bit of a controversial topic. Do you think that, and you kind of already answered this, but do you think that the rich have a right to use the advantages that the tax law has in it of corporations to avoid paying taxes?
Yeah, I always think it's a pretty controversial topic. People people think the rich are greedy and that they're just trying to, game the system. But
And it kind of brings politics into it a little bit, I think, which is why it makes it more controversial. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's not get into the politics
Yeah.
side of it. I think he actually even mentions that in the book, how the rich are able to influence the politicians.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. Well, that'll be another podcast maybe.
Yeah,
But
that's a whole different topic.
one thing I love about like the way the tax law is written, because as our investment portfolio has grown and we have been able to use some of these benefits, is that it leaves more money in my pocket and I get to decide what I want to do with it. So I can invest it into charities. I can give it to individuals if I want to help them out. I can help another person who's just getting involved in investing. Like there's a lot of good that I can do. And again, politics aside, I don't want the government to make all of the decisions for me. So
Absolutely.
I want that money in my pocket. But if any of you are watching us on YouTube and you have a strong opinion about this, we would love for you to comment on YouTube how you kind of feel about the way the tax law is written. If you're listening to us on any of the other platforms, go on to our YouTube. I'll link it in the show notes and you can leave your comments there. So, yeah, Jamie, you want to take us out for this one?
Sure. As always, if you liked what you heard today, please go out and grab yourself a copy of the book. By all means, please go back and listen to the first episode, catch up, and follow along as we go throughout the year. If you're watching on this YouTube, please comment, share, like, all that good stuff. And join us next week as we discuss how the rich invest money.
How the rich invent money.
Invent money. That's right. Thanks.
Yeah.